Another day of massive protests in Belarus as tens of thousands gather to call for President Alexander Lukashenko to resign, 2 weeks after the country's disputed election. Wildfires continue to rage across the state of California, with fears that new lightning storms could spark fresh blazes. And the number of coronavirus cases in India passes 3 million after a recent surge in infections in rural areas. Thanks for joining us on France 24. I'm Stephen Carroll. Tens of thousands of demonstrators have gathered in cities around Belarus, seeking the resignation of President Alexander Lukashenko. In Minsk's Independence Square, protesters chanted freedom as they called for fresh elections and an end to violence by security forces. It's been 2 weeks since the incumbent Lukashenko claimed to have won a sixth term in office in a vote which the EU, among others, has said was neither free nor fair. The president has ordered the military into full combat readiness, saying there's a need to protect the country. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has criticised the opposition to Lukashenko, saying those figures who've left the country are seeking bloodshed. For more on this, we can speak to Anaïs Marin, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights for Belarus. She joins us now from Vilnius in neighbouring Lithuania. Thank you for joining us, Anaïs. In the 2 weeks that we've had since this election, we've had massive waves of arrests, protesters being injured by police, even some deaths. What are now your biggest concerns about what's happening in Belarus?
Well, actually, the whole society is in post-traumatic shock, and I would like to stress the fact that the crisis is almost of a humanitarian nature and requires sustained attention. There are still people missing. There are still people in detention who are allegedly suffering torture, and these crimes will have to be investigated at some point. Regarding today's events, of course, the situation is extremely volatile and susceptible to provocations or incidents that could escalate into a new round of police violence, unfortunately.
What hopes do you have that those investigations that you're talking about will be able to be conducted, and do you think there's any hope that might happen soon?
Well, hopefully under another democratic government that would become possible. In the meantime, the international community should offer to conduct such an investigation. I believe that the UN might be involved, of course, but when it comes to the political dialogue in order to get out of the current post-electoral crisis, I believe that multilateralism is key, and the OSCE, for example, could play a role to call Mr. Lukashenko or the government of Belarus to the negotiation table.
Do you think a peaceful resolution can be found at this stage?
I still hope so, and this is inspired by the evidence that some insiders of the regime, both civil servants, including diplomats, and others, have been deeply shocked by the level of violence and are not supportive of the president anymore. They don't consider him as legitimate. Whether this will translate in further defections and possibly an attempt to influence the authorities from within is still a questioning point, of course.
Do you fear more violence at this stage?
Of course, but on the other hand, I notice that most of the warnings regarding an escalation of violence tend to come from disinformation channels, both from inside Belarus, state TV, for example, but also from Russian media. And this eventually would conduct to violence, and it is obvious that the goal is to make the social movement doubt in its own forces and legitimacy. The whole Belarusian population is hostile to violence. Maybe only Mr. Lukashenko and his and the Siloviki are still able to implement such unlawful orders. But in general, the scenario of a bloodshed, I still hope can be avoided.
You've spoken about the responsibility the international community has here. At what point should they be stepping in, and in what form?
This is up to diplomats. My role here as a special procedures mandate holder of the Human Rights Council is to call for a de-escalation of tensions, to avoid violence, and to restore dialogue. And for this, I remain available, of course, as special rapporteur, and I look forward to eventually having the possibility to be granted access, which has been refused to the mandate holder since the mandate was established in 2012.
Okay, Anaïs Marin, UN Special Rapporteur on Belarus, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The wife of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has visited him in hospital in Berlin 3 days after his suspected poisoning. There's been no update on his condition since he was airlifted to Germany from Russia on Saturday. The doctors say they won't comment until they've been able to analyse his test results. Navalny collapsed on Thursday after drinking tea his allies believe was laced with poison. There are fears of more electrical storms on the way in California, which could add to the record wildfires already raging in the state. Thousands of lightning strikes on already dry terrain sparked the cascade of blazes in recent days. There are almost 14,000 firefighters battling the flames, with smoke spreading across the western United States. James Wilson reports.
California is in a state of crisis. 14,000 firefighters are spending the weekend trying to contain more than 24 major fires. But while on Saturday the teams enjoyed good weather, meteorologists have issued a red flag warning for Sunday, predicting that the return of strong winds, lightning and little rain will lead to further outbreaks.
Well, it's tragic, but our chiefs back home, they're aggressive in the training that we have in our brush response, and we adequately prepare for it so we can come out here and we can help out the communities wherever we're called to serve.
Satellite images show the extent of the blazes, and most of the outbreaks are located in the north of the state, near San Francisco and the state capital, Sacramento, where the flames have already burnt through over 1 million acres of land. 700 homes have been engulfed, a handful of people have died, and tens of thousands have been evacuated to safer ground.
They said 1 week would be probably for us, but the farther you go up into the mountain, we're looking at 2 to 3 weeks, if there's anything left for you to go back to.
Much affected. I have several friends who've lost their homes and many others who are evacuated. So this is a really difficult time, but it's great to see the community pull together to do what we can to support each other.
State officials have warned that the worst is not yet over, and residents in cities such as Santa Cruz, so far untouched by the flames, have been told to prepare to flee at short notice.
The US House of Representatives has approved a $25 billion bailout for the country's postal service to reverse recent cuts made at the agency. The political row over USPS comes as millions of Americans are expected to use postal votes in November's election because of the coronavirus pandemic. Although some Republicans broke ranks to support this bill in the House, the Republican Majority Leader in the Senate says it will never pass there. Yinka Oyatade reports.
In a vote of 257 to 150, the House of Representatives passed legislation that could give the US Postal Service $25 billion. It's money that Democrats and some Republicans alike believe could save mail-in ballots ahead of November's elections.
We are experiencing a global pandemic, and now our US Postal Service is under attack. Let it be clear, this administration is waging an authoritarian campaign to sabotage this election by manipulating the Postal Service to suppress our votes.
The bill aims to deter Postal Service leaders from making changes that impede prompt, reliable and efficient service. It comes in the wake of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin's recent removal of blue mailboxes and sorting machines, which has slowed mail service across the nation. It's a move approved of by President Donald Trump. The post office has warned that those reductions, along with cutting overtime for postal workers, could mean that ballots sent by mail won't get there in time to be counted in at least 46 states. Changes that Democrats argue could penalize the most disadvantaged.
The Postmaster General is pushing sweeping new operational changes that degrade service, delay the mail, and threaten to disenfranchise voters, particularly in communities of color.
In a series of tweets, President Trump launched a scathing attack on the vote, dubbing it a money-wasting hoax by Democrats. Even though the president himself votes by mail, he has falsely claimed it's rife with fraud and has dismissed the post office as a joke. The bill, though, is expected to die in the Republican-held Senate.
At least 13 people have died in Peru after police raided a nightclub for breaking coronavirus restrictions. They were crushed to death as people rushed to leave the venue in Lima when officers arrived. Around 120 people were in the club at the time. 23 were arrested. Nightclubs and bars have been shut in Peru since March due to COVID-19, and a ban on family gatherings had just recently been extended. India has passed the milestone of 3 million cases of COVID-19 after a recent surge in infections. Relative to its population, the infection rate in India is still much lower than the United States or Brazil. Nevertheless, the recent rise is worrying many Indians, as Kameen Edilek now reports.
This is the new normal in India, as the country tops 3 million coronavirus cases. Many here are increasingly worried.
ಮನೆಯಿಂದ ಆಚೆ ಹೋಗಕ್ಕೆ ಭಯ ಇದೆ, ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗೋಕ್ಕೂ ಭಯ ಇದೆ ನನಗೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಮನೇಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ತಾಯಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸೀನಿಯರ್ ಸಿಟಿಸನ್, 67 ವರ್ಷ, ನನ್ನ ವೈಫು ಪ್ರೆಗ್ನೆಂಟು, ಮಗು 3 ವರ್ಷ ಮಗು ಇದೆ.
India's lockdown, one of the strictest in the world, has been mostly eased in recent weeks. But as over 1 billion people got moving again, so did the virus, with more than 69,000 cases detected on Sunday. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to boost testing to up to 1 million a day, a goal he's almost reached. The rapid antigen test India has been using is faster and cheaper than the PCR test, which is the most commonly used method worldwide. But it's also less reliable, sometimes giving false negatives. Nearly a third of all COVID-19 checks performed in the country are this type of test. Initially, India's COVID hotspots were in Delhi and Mumbai, but the virus is now spreading in rural areas.
Even as some areas are gaining control, the big cities where it all started, the smaller towns, the villages, and much of eastern India, which was not affected in the initial part, they are now getting affected. So you're seeing the epidemic moving like a wave across India.
India's epidemic is one of the fastest growing in the world, prompting the government to backtrack on its decision not to postpone university entrance exams. They'll now take place when the situation stabilises.
Now, 3 months behind schedule, no fans in the stadium, but this Sunday will see the finale of European football's Champions League. Paris Saint-Germain are seeking their first win in this competition, but they face a tough challenge from 5-time title holders Bayern Munich. Security has been stepped up in Paris ahead of the game. Our sports editor Simon Harding reports from the host city of Lisbon.
Fans are slowly streaming into Lisbon, where in just a few hours Paris Saint-Germain will take on Bayern Munich in the final of the Champions League, a very particular Champions League final, as you know, because there will be no fans allowed in the stadium, but those fans instead congregating in the city centre of Lisbon, congregating in the Rossio Square in particular, with a giant replica of the Champions League trophy, which you can see behind me. Paris Saint-Germain, and you can hear the fans right there, who will be trying to win the biggest tournament in the history of the club who celebrated their 50th anniversary just a few days ago. In their way, of course, stands Bayern Munich. They're in their 11th Champions League final. They'll be looking to win their 6th trophy. They are the team to beat in this competition. The Bavarians, the only team to have won all 10 of their Champions League games. If they win the final, it will be a record, the first time every team has won their matches in the Champions League campaign. That match, of course, kicks off at 9 o'clock at the Estadio da Luz in Lisbon.
This is France 24. Our next news update is in 15 minutes. Do stay with us.